Good evening. I'm Ed Gallagher, President of the American Scandinavian Foundation, and it's my very great pleasure to welcome you to our headquarters, Scandinavia House, the Nordic Center in America, for this evening's Curtis L. Carlson Lecture by His Excellency, Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, who will be speaking on the current state of the UN and challenges it's facing. Since its incorporation in New York City in 1911, the ASF has served as the leading cultural and educational link between the United States and Denmark, Finland, Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. Established by Danish-American industrialist Niels Poulsen and a group of other forward-thinking leaders from business and education, the ASF was the first international non-governmental society to have as its sole purpose the development of goodwill through the exchange of people and ideas. It was designed to meet the needs of its time through fellowships, internships, and publications, as well as a wide range of educational and cultural programs, which are now presented here at Scandinavia House, which was opened in 2000 to serve as a meeting place for Americans, Scandinavians, and people from all nations. It is a forum for the exchange of ideas and for the development of goodwill. The Curtis L. Carlson Lecture Series was established by the Carlson Family Foundation at the time of Scandinavia House's opening to support public discourse on issues and topics of particular relevance to the people of the United States and the Nordic countries. Tonight, our great friend Ambassador Eliasson follows in the footsteps of many distinguished speakers, including Kofi Annan, Martti Ahtisaari, and Jan Egeland. It's a great pleasure to have him with us this evening, and he has been a great friend of the Foundation and Scandinavia House, and I am now going to turn the podium over to Chairman of the ASF, Bente Svensson-Frans, who will introduce him. Bente?
Ladies and gentlemen, it is with great pleasure that we welcome His Excellency Mr. Jan Eliasson, Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations, to Scandinavia House this evening. Ambassador Eliasson's diplomatic and foreign service achievements are so numerous that we could be here all evening to talk about them, so perhaps you'll permit me just to hit a few of the high points of his career. Ambassador Eliasson was born in Gothenburg, Sweden, graduated from the Swedish Naval Academy in 1962, and earned a master's degree in economics and business administration in 1965. He has had diplomatic postings in New York, Paris, Bonn, Washington, and Harare, where he opened the first Swedish embassy in 1980. Ambassador Eliasson was the first UN Undersecretary for Humanitarian Affairs and was involved in operations in Africa and the Balkans. He took initiatives on landmines, conflict prevention, and humanitarian action. From 1980 to 86, Ambassador Eliasson was part of the UN mediation missions in the war between Iran and Iraq, headed by former Prime Minister of Sweden, Olof Palme. From 1988 to 92, he was Sweden's ambassador to the United Nations and also served as the Secretary General's personal representative for Iran-Iraq. From 1993 to 94, he served as mediator in the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict for the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. From 1994 to 2000, he served as Sweden's State Secretary for Foreign Affairs, a key position in formulating and implementing Swedish foreign policy. From September 2000 until July 2005, Ambassador Eliasson served as President of the 60th session of the UN General Assembly and as Sweden's ambassador to the United States. In March 2006, he was appointed Foreign Minister of Sweden and served in that capacity until the fall of that year. From 2007 to 2008, Ambassador Eliasson served as the Special Envoy of the UN Secretary General for Darfur. Prior to his appointment as Deputy Secretary General in July of 2012, Ambassador Eliasson also served as Chair of Water Aid Sweden and was a member of the UN Secretary General's Advocacy Group for the Millennium Development Goals. As a visiting professor at both Uppsala and Gothenburg University, he has lectured extensively on mediation, conflict resolution, and UN reform. We are very grateful that Ambassador Eliasson has always been a supporter of the American Scandinavian Foundation. He was a particularly strong advocate during the process of building Scandinavia House 13 years ago, helping us obtain critical funding from not only the Swedish government, but all the other Nordic governments as well. He is greatly admired by us all, and as a token of our esteem, We honored him with our Distinguished Public Service Award in 2007, and the citation read, "In recognition of his extraordinary accomplishments in the fields of diplomacy, foreign relations, and humanitarian affairs, and for his ongoing dedication to building strong bonds between the United States and Sweden." At a recent visit to Scandinavia House, he told one of our staff members, "I always feel so at home here." Ambassador Eliasson, I hope you will always feel that this is your home. You're always most welcome. And it is my honor to introduce to you now His Excellency, Mr. Jan Eliasson.
Thank you very much, Chairman Frans. I certainly feel at home here. Although you made me ask myself, did I do all that? It's a reminder of my age. But actually, I feel very close to American Scandinavian Foundation. And I feel very close to the Nordic Scandinavian countries' relationship to the United States. Absolutely crucial. These flags behind us is a reminder of what I think is so crucial in life, is that you have a sense of your roots, but also that you have a sense of your wings. Roots and wings. Without roots, you don't have the stability, the sense of direction, the structure. But without wings, you don't have that sense of adventure, discovering something new, something that you or your ancestors, parents, or grandparents decided to do many years ago. I know many of you have that Swedish-American background and heritage, and you should be proud of it. I think also the word identity is used far too often only in singular. We think identity is only one thing, but in my view, identities is much better in plural. Practically all of you have several identities, and by that you should not develop any schizophrenia, but rather the contrary, you should feel very rich that you have the roots in several cultures, and this will give you great strength in the future and in the present, not least. I also am very proud to speak at this very important building, where I remember when we struggled, some of you were already in that discussion at that time. Ed Gallagher was already on the barricades, Lena Kaplan, the Heimbolds, Christian was involved from another perspective, and we made it. It was a bit of an uphill in the beginning. You may think the relationship between the 5 Nordic countries is absolutely harmonious. It is. But there are some bumps in the road, discussions that we had. But it was such a great moment when this great event took place of opening this wonderful house. And it has become almost a landmark in New York. Most people know about this building and what is being done in this building for all ages, not least thanks to Monica, the children's room there. I have a grandchild, 8 months old, here now. And my son is in the room. I'm nearsighted. Is he here? Where's my son? Oh, yes. There he is. Good. So my grandchild is already testing your facilities here now. It's going to be historic continuity on my side. I thought I would do it very simple. I would switch this around and talk about the challenges first, and then I will talk about how we in the United Nations try to deal with these challenges. And I will take as a starting point that so many people say that we live in a world with new challenges. And sometimes that's a banality. You say there's such a revolutionary situation now. But when I thought about this the other day, I said to myself, can I really prove that it is new, that we have some new trends that we should be aware of in order to understand not only the world, but also our own agenda at home in practically every nation, whether it's a big one or a small one. And I came to the conclusion, yes, there are absolutely and historically new trends. Let me try to enumerate a few of them. First of all, the very major geopolitical, geoeconomic shift that you see in today's world. It is so obvious with the shift to Asia, the economic weight moving eastward, the growth figures of the Asian countries, and this not only geoeconomic, but again geopolitical shift. These emerging powers are indeed powers. 10 years ago we called them emerging economies, but now they certainly also play a very important political role. I see that in the United Nations. Countries who aspire to be member of the Security Council, who have growth figures of 5 to 7%, 5 to 10%, huge populations, great impact regionally, and they are not in the most powerful body of the United Nations, namely the Security Council. So the first thing I would point to is this clear geopolitical, geoeconomic shift in today's world. The second new feature, in my view, is that you in this room and your generations are the first ones in history that have to think about the health of this planet. I wonder how many of you parents have been speaking about climate change or finite resources in today's world. Very few. The sustainability, which has to be added to today's economic development and political planning, is absolutely necessary. Everything we do from now on must be sustainable. There might still be some skeptics on climate change, very few though. It's obvious. Just look at the different droughts, floods, storms. Look at the horrible situation in the Philippines right now. And it's pretty clearly stated there is a relationship. Maybe it could be disputed, but still, there is something that leads me to the conclusion that it's about time that we make peace with nature. We have not quite realized that we are here as guests on this planet. So I think the sustainability dimension is absolutely necessary, both in the political, social, and economic arena. The fact that resources are finite, and that we have to think of global warming, which is, in my view, a fact. And even if there are doubts of this, I think we still have to plan for a life with more awareness of saving resources and the way we take good approaches to both consumption and production patterns. Thirdly, definitely a new trend, which was not the case only 20 years ago. It is the enormous communication and information revolution. I don't even have to mention this, particularly for the young people. I feel like I'm from the Middle Ages when I talk to my son. And his son will probably be a whiz kid at age 2. My grandchild, obviously. This is not only significant from the point of view of technology and media, it's a huge force of social change. If you look at the Arabs, I wouldn't call it spring anymore, Arab awakening, this role, the role of the Twitter, the role of Facebook, the role of the pictures that are sent from the demonstrations, it's incredible. When I was mediating in some of the conflicts that were mentioned earlier, the dictators could hide. They could hide reality away from their population and from the world. That's not possible anymore. Nobody can hide anything anymore. And with rapid speed, information is spread. So here is definitely a new factor, which I think will play an enormously important role politically, economically, socially, psychologically in today's world. It's a new phenomenon. Fourthly, and I don't say that to ingratiate myself with about half in this room, but I would really claim that this century is the century of the women. This century, it has never happened before. This is a horrible historic mistake and failure not to have seen this enormous potential in women's empowerment. Now finally is coming. I'm absolutely certain. In the political realm, in the social areas, of course, but also in the hopefully in the economic area, also in the private sector, although it's slow sector is in recognizing this. And that's an enormously important change. It has never happened in history. You women, you are the first ones to really be part of this empowerment. And I think most of us men are on your side. In our enlightened self-interest, we will welcome the matriarchate coming later on. But it's definitely, and I don't say that to please some of you here. I really think it's absolutely crucial, and it's of great political, economic, and social importance. What else? Well, I could enumerate long things, but I have to come to the point of the United Nations. But there are two things that I'd like to mention also, which are new and which are of an enormous importance for today's world. And that is migration and urbanization. The role that migrants play in today's world is crucial for our economies, but still it's become an element in some countries' political debates, which has become controversial. You have a tendency to look at the category of migrants in the relationship of us and them, and by that, in countries where we have economic difficulties, and there are many, this could cause internal tensions. You have violations of human rights to migrants. You have a tremendous economic force by migrants. You know that the remittances from migrants working in foreign countries are larger than, more important, larger than the whole official development assistance of the world. All the countries' development assistance is less than the remittances from migrant workers in today's world. It's sustaining economies in the Philippines and Sri Lanka and other places to a great degree, at least locally in these communities. And of course, urbanization. You know that millions of people are moving into cities every day. Not every week, I would say. And this is a huge pressure on resources and also puts great demands on infrastructure. I have a special passion for the needs of water and sanitation in the world. For instance, in the big cities, in poor countries, you have enormous problems of the sanitation, which is not organized for a city. There is no infrastructure. There is no municipality tax. In some places, they don't even know who owns the land. So how can you have a sanitation system? I just mentioned that as an example of this new trend, urbanization. Just like all our societies back home, our Nordic countries, we had 70% farmers in the 20s, 50% in the 40s, and then down to 6 or 7% today. So we have this globally now. What will the world look like when you have this tremendous strain on resources with this 60% of humanity? 60% of humanity will live in cities in the next 5 years. That brings you back also to the second issue that I mentioned, sustainability. Finite resources, pressure on resources, peace with nature. Okay, by this I hope I've proved that we indeed have a world with new trends that you have to adapt to. Okay, so all this is happening apart from the old trends, which are still there, unfortunately, conflicts, poverty, and all the things that we have to struggle with, violations of human rights. And this is where we come in, the United Nations. We are there to represent the states of the world. United Nations is a collection of member states. But the three first words of the Charter, and I always carry the Charter in my pocket. Yes, I do today also. The three first words of the Charter are, we the peoples. We the peoples. So our job is to, as states, as much as possible, represent the peoples. And I say to my colleagues, two of them are here today, that our job is to realize, first of all, realistically, that the world, the UN is a reflection, a mirror of the world as it is, whether we like it or not. Human rights violations, dictatorships, etc., lack of democracy. We have to start with that as a realistic starting point. But we should also remember that the world, the United Nations must also be a reflection of the world as it should be, according to this Charter. Equality, sovereign equality among states, but also equality among human beings. If we forget that, then we forget the mission of the UN. And I would say, if I were to best define my job, is that my job is, and I hope you, perhaps your different walks of life are driven by similar ideas, and that is that we have to diminish the gap between the world as it is and the world as it should be. If we can reduce that gap, then we have done something, at least try to do something this time we have on this planet. So when I was President of the General Assembly 2005 and 2006, we were trying to summarize an enormous document, 172 paragraphs. My dear friend Kofi Annan asked me, said, we got to find a formula. We can't sort of have a document 170 paragraphs without having a strong sentence, a paragraph which says it all. So we worked on that, and we had this formula, which is the UN agenda. And that opens up that document of the 16th of September 2005. There is no peace without development. But there is no development without peace. And there is no lasting peace or sustainable development without respect of human rights. In other words, there are three pillars. If you don't have peace, you don't have development. If you don't have development, you don't have peace. And none of the above if you have grave violations of human rights. And the difficulty at the same time as the great challenge is that these three pillars have to be equally strong. Because in my later mediations, Darfur and otherwise, I've noticed that if one of these pillars is weak, the whole structure is weak. If you have the war, you don't have the rest, etc., etc. So we have to work with all these three at the same time. It's a huge task, but it's also a very inspiring task. It also shows that in today's world, we should realize that everything is interconnected. I think we have a curse in organizational culture, both in governments and in international organizations. I don't know about the private sector, but I think the curse is that we too often organize ourselves and work vertically, in silos. While in fact, the problems of today require us to think and work horizontally, crossing into other areas, seeing the problems from different perspectives. In this case, peace, security, yes. Development, yes. Human rights, yes. This is a new way of, for me, a new way of working, which is, it's quite heavy lifting to introduce that culture in any organization. I speak as former foreign minister of Sweden, but also as Deputy Secretary of the United Nations, because we are organized in our specialties, and we think that we can solve the problems there. Of course, we should be absolutely perfect in that sector. We should know our job. But we should also realize that if we are to solve today's problems, which are so complex, we need to cross into the others. So let me give you the three most important challenges in these sectors, and I'll be now very concrete. The first one, peace security. Our biggest nightmare is Syria. I walked into the office of Secretary General Ban Ki-moon in October last year. I told him that our mediator, Lakhdar Brahimi, who followed, by the way, Kofi Annan, I told him that Lakhdar Brahimi was on his way to see President Assad. And Ban Ki-moon asked me, when is he going? When is he going to see him? In 10 days, I said. And then Ban Ki-moon pondered and said, 10 days. 10 days, that's 1,000 to 1,500 dead. In other words, he didn't count the days. He counted every day as 100 people killed, being killed. And that was October last year. And now we have 110,000 approximately. I don't have the exact figure. But over 100,000 people killed and 9 million people in need, 40% of the population in humanitarian need. 2 million refugees outside the country, out of which half, over 1 million, are children, spread all over Lebanon, Jordan, Turkey, and Iraq. We had a progress, we had a step forward the other week when we, and I'm very proud of that we got the chemical weapons operations going, and now there is already destruction going on of chemical weapons in Syria. It's a great step forward, and the Security Council finally was unified. We hoped that would be translated into unity also on humanitarian action. We aren't there yet. We hope very much that we will be able to get the help of outside forces, nations also. But above all, we want to start finally the negotiations about peace. Because this conflict can only end by two ways. It can end by a so-called military victory. I hope you saw the quotation marks. There is no military victory. If there is one, it's going to be a revenge wave the day after. You need to have a negotiated transition, negotiated solution. And that's why we are pushing for the talks in Geneva as soon as possible. It's still difficult to get the delegations assembled and representative of their interests. So here we hope that the unity in the Security Council will continue and that we will be pressing for a political end of this horrible conflict. But it's the one example I want to mention, slightly masochistically in front of you, that we feel a certain powerlessness because we can only be as effective as we are as a collection of Secretariat resources and Security Council. And if the Security Council is not unified, as they have not been up till this moment when we had unity on chemical weapons, we have a weak hand to play. And that Kofi Annan felt, and that now Lakhdar Brahimi feels. But we hope very much that we will be able to end this horrible conflict. It has also ramification for the neighborhood. It will destabilize Lebanon, Jordan if it continues. It unfortunately has led to something horrible, namely a stronger emphasis on ethnic and sectarian and religious divides. People talk about themselves not as Syrians in Syria. They talk about themselves as Alawites, Sunnis, Shiites, Druze, Kurds, Christians. And by that, the border disappears because these groups will go right into Lebanon, right into Iraq, etc. So then you have us and them syndrome that comes back also through the conflict. Second challenge in the development sector, this was the peace and security sector. Development sector is to set the direction for the agenda for development after 2015. We have had a wonderful tool since the year 2000 called Millennium Development Goals, MDGs, 8 of them, defined in very clear, concrete terms: water and sanitation, health, education, etc. And some of these goals go well, have been great progress, not least in education. Children in Africa learn to read and write to a degree that has never been the case before. There's been important progress in the reduction of extreme poverty, not least because of progress in Asia. But then there are horrible, slow movement on issues like maternal health, which is a shame that so many women are dying in childbirth around the world. One of the most wonderful professions that I recommend to every young girl is to become a midwife. Midwife, that's a beautiful profession, isn't it? When I was in Darfur, I asked in every village, what is it you really want? They wanted to have wells drilled, but what they always came back with, a health clinic with a midwife that could save so many lives. Maternal health is going very poorly. And the worst and most scandalous goal is sanitation. Water is going relatively well. But this is a luxury for 768 million people. This is an absolute luxury, a dream. Have a glass of clean water. Can you imagine? Tap water. 2.5 billion people don't have sanitation, which is another word for toilets. That's 37% of humanity. This is the reason why 2,000 children under the age of 5 die every day. In diarrheas, dysentery, dehydration, cholera. And I've seen them die in front of my own eyes. That's why I am so committed, like many of my colleagues, Pim Balder is one of them here, to deal with this enormous challenge. And it's the most lagging of all the goals. There is a sort of taboo around the word toilet. I remember when I was speaking in the General Assembly 3 years ago, as a former president of the General Assembly, I was given a very honorable speaking slot, and I ended my speech, which was written, and I sometimes have a slightly anarchistic trait, because the last words, we have to live with a life of dignity for all. That was coded word for toilets. But instead of that, I said, we have to live for a life with toilets for all. And I remember the interpreters were looking, did he really say toilet? Now I'm breaking the taboo by talking about open defecation, which is practiced by 1.1 billion people in 22 countries, which should also end by 2025. So these goals have been very good tools, except for water and sanitation and maternal health. What do we do for 2015 and onwards? How do we define the road after 2015? That's our biggest task, and those of you who have member states working in the United Nations, please pass the word to your leadership that this is one of the most important tasks that they could ever have, to define the road for the for the world's development. And I won't go into detail, but I would just mention 3 words. We have to still work for poverty eradication, not only sanitation problems, and the figures that I've cited were proof of that, but there's also grave inequalities that have developed, enormous inequalities, not only between countries, but also inside countries. Believe it or not, in today's world, there are more poor people, extreme poor people, people living in extreme poverty in middle-income countries than in poor countries. So there's been very negative development in terms of inequalities. The second thing I'd like to mention is what I said earlier, sustainability. We have to make sure that the poverty eradication program is combined with the program for sustainability, because we cannot fight poverty if we do not do it in a sustainable way and have economic development goals that are indeed sustainable. And the third factor is something that I find extremely important. That's the importance of institutions. It sounds boring perhaps, but it's very important. When we fail, like I've seen myself, I just came back from Somalia last week. I was in Afghanistan 3 months ago. When you don't have functioning institutions, you don't have development. And sadly enough, you have grave risks for conflict also. Institutions are extremely powerful. If you look at our 5 Nordic countries, look at your history, or ask your parents or grandparents. These 5 countries were among the poorest in Europe in the 1920s. We were among the poorest of the poorest in Europe. I myself come from a very humble background, so I know what this is all about. And what happened was in the 30s, there were 3 decisions embraced by all, most political parties, but also the employers and the labor unions. Three investments. One in infrastructure, good roads, good railroads. Secondly, good education for all, possibility for every talented boy and girl to study for free from grade 1 to university, including university. And thirdly, good institutions, good, honest institutions. So these were the 3 reasons why we turned from the poorest to the most prosperous. Well, same thing goes for the rest of the world. So institutions are important. So I hope that the road ahead on the post-2015 development agenda will be poverty eradication, sustainability, and institutions. Strong institutions, honest institutions, non-corrupt institutions. Last point, and I will finish. Human rights, rule of law, human dignity. We have to come back to that all the time. We the peoples. And the dignity of each individual. And I must tell you, I speak very personally today, I am really very disturbed by the brutalization that goes on around the world right now. It's so paradoxical because you think as development civilization as a progressive curve. But if you look at what is happening in today's world now, I will not pain you with this because it's just so horrible to think about it. If you look at how many civilians that are killed intentionally to instill fear. You have a woman, a girl, who's standing up for education, and she is almost killed in the bus. And then the people go after those. There was another situation where the college girls were killed, 13 of them, and then the terrorists followed them to the hospital and killed nurses. In Nigeria, you had 2 schools burnt down with small children dying in Christian schools. I can go all over the map and I see this enormously dangerous brutalization. And what they are after is something that I really feel I want to say to you. They are after us getting scared. Time magazine wrote after 9/11, Christian, remember, we talked about that earlier. They wrote about the fear factor. The intention by those who want to provoke our societies to take away the beauty of democracy in our society is that we should get scared and divide humanity into them and identify a group as demons around us. I just come back from Somalia and there was a horrible, and Kenya, remember the the Westgate shopping mall. And I noticed that fear had entered the Kenyan people's minds. It was all over. You could see the nervousness. You could see that people were feeling that there was a new Kenya. And this is what is happening right now. And this comes back to something, the sanctity of life and the respect of human life, which is so important to bring to the fore. So even if we work on the larger issues of the trends in the world, even if we talk about the mediation efforts in different conflicts, even if we talk about the post-2015 agenda, if it's not improvement of conditions here and now, we haven't done our job. So, by that, I have talked far too long. For a Swede, I should be much more taciturn and short, brief in my comments, but I thank you for your attention, and thank you for the honor of delivering the Curtis Carlson Lecture.
Giusetta Capriati, Foreign Policy Association. You mentioned briefly the reform of the UN Security Council, which has been talked about for a long time. Now Europe wants a permanent seat, not to mention Germany. India wants a permanent seat. Brazil wants a permanent seat. You talked about the emerging powers, but the announcement of the enlargement of the Security Council must be approved by the permanent member, so it's like a dead end. What can be done about it?
The reform of the Security Council is one of the most difficult negotiations, mainly because the seat of the Security Council, particularly if you have a permanent membership, is extremely powerful. If you have the veto power, you have indeed more power than others. And therefore, when you have new aspiring countries to get into the Security Council, you have countries that would be very worried if this new country would enter the Security Council. So you have political blockages, so to speak, coming out of the competition for those seats. But I would claim, and I would agree, that indeed the Security Council, for its future legitimacy, will need to better reflect the world as it is, because it reflects the world as it was in 1945, when this charter was written. But it is a very slow process. And in the meantime, if you don't have the decisions, because they are blocked again by veto powers, in order to get the reform, you have to have the acceptance of the veto powers. By the way, when I talked to Sir Brian Urquhart, some of you may know the name or know him even, he's now 93 years old. He was part of this work. He was in San Francisco, and he told me that this was the most difficult part of writing the charter, was to introduce the veto right. And I asked him, why did you have to do it? Well, you had to do it because otherwise the great powers would not have taken the United Nations seriously. So this was a way of getting the United Nations to be the place where the great powers would also take disputes. It's a price that was paid, but that was what Sir Brian explained to me. Now, if you have the veto, then you may consider, and this was ideas that I brought out when I was President of the General Assembly, you may think of reducing the use of the veto. The veto is in fact a sign that you have not been able to achieve results through negotiations in the Council. It's actually a sign of failure. And I would think that after the end of the Cold War, we should have developed more of a negotiation mechanism in the Security Council, so that the veto power was not used to the degree that was the case during the Cold War. That unfortunately hasn't been the case. But there was an interesting proposal by the French president in the General Assembly now in September. He said that when there are mass crimes, atrocities, genocide, ethnic cleansing, then the veto must not be used. So there's the beginning now of reducing the use of the veto. But above all, I as a mediator and negotiator, I would want the Security Council to negotiate and not give up and threaten with a veto. I have a joke, which I accept now to say publicly, I said to my colleagues in the Security Council, you should work like the Catholic Church when they select popes. You should lock yourself up, and only when you have done your negotiation, the white smoke comes up, you have the resolution. We should have done that at the beginning of the Syria war. Well, I will not bring that further now. We are a huge enterprise, and I know we have our faults, and I'm the first one to sometimes become desperate about bureaucracy, and like in any huge organization. But I still think that we deliver a lot out there in the field. I'm very much a field person. I was emergency relief coordinator. I was in all those crisis areas in Africa, Asia. And when I'm out there, I always come back energized. I feel, when I see what's being done daily, I get encouraged. I have a little card here. We could make sure that anyone who's interested in this little card, I will make sure that you get it in 15, 20 copies. It's a little card that says what the UN does every day. I have it there on page of the Article 33 of the UN Charter. That's where I always said. Here's what it says for me. We provide food for 90 million people in 75 countries every day. We vaccinate 58% of the world's children, saving 2.5 million lives a year. We assist over 34 million refugees and people fleeing war, famine, and persecution. We keep peacekeepers, 120,000 in 16 operations on 4 continents. We mobilize $12.5 billion in humanitarian and refugee assistance to help people affected by emergencies, Syria, and right now, Philippines. So this is to me what the UN is. And that's why I say, remember the Charter, but I also say, remember the child. So, and then we have had, certainly, like any organization, problems with accountability, mistakes made, disorganized activities, yes, but we do our best under very trying circumstances. The chemical weapons success, yes, it was a success. First of all, it was a success, and I will humbly admit that, because the permanent members of the Security Council agreed, so there was a unity in the Security Council. But after that, it took 4 to 5 days for us to be in the arena and do the monitoring and now do the destruction. I'm pretty proud that we set that up so quickly. Our job is now in Syria. Syria is, we hope that the operation will be finished by the middle of next year. That's quite a task, but I think it is doable, and we intend to do our best to keep the timetable. Iran is another issue. Iran, of course, is a matter where you have 2 types of negotiations. One with the IAEA, the International Agency for Energy, Atomic Energy Agency, where they have made some progress on inspections of nuclear energy entities in Iran. And then there is the more political negotiation, 5+1, that took place in Geneva, where they did not achieve a result 2 days ago. There are interesting openings from the Iranian side, and now it is, of course, for the 5 others in the Security Council plus Germany to test these ideas, whether they hold water and whether there could be a development in the direction of clarity on Iran not developing nuclear weapons. If that were the case, if it were to be the case, it could open up to a positive development for reducing tensions, because Iran could play a very important role in Afghanistan, in Iraq, in the Gulf area, and possibly in Syria, although there the difficulties are very, very big. But the present state of affairs is that the new leadership of Iran is sending signals, and my understanding is that most of the other countries concerned take these signals seriously, but of course want to test whether the signals are serious. And this is the process going on now. Question is how long time we have, or they have. There is a certain political tension in both Iran and certain other countries about whether one should give this time to the Iranians to prove their point. I would hope that we give them enough time to prove the point, and that we should test this very seriously. Well, I think Africa unfairly is seen as a continent of conflicts only. I have spent a lot of time in Africa, and I've seen also great examples of vitality and growth. Economically, you know, the African countries are somewhere between 5 and 8% of growth figures right now. And there is great progress in education, and I think the African nations very much represent the future. They are, of course, haunted by these horrible conflicts. Mali, Democratic Republic of Congo, Somalia, where I just came back from, Sudan. Yes, but we also have great progress in countries like Ghana, Botswana, wonderful progress, peaceful developments, and good leadership. I am very hopeful that we will see a different Africa coming out. But let's face it, the facts are there still. Sub-Saharan Africa is where we have the problems of water sanitation, some of the diseases that are most serious, and also issues related to lacking infrastructure, I would say, and strong institutions. So there's work to be done, but I'm really hopeful. I would strike a more positive note on the future of Africa. And you come back from Africa always energized, vitalized. Believe it or not, I can come back from Africa. I kind of seen horrible things, but still, there's something there that catches you. Nordic countries' impact. Well, I think you as Nordics should be very proud of what the Nordic countries have meant to the United Nations. Tryggve Lie, Dag Hammarskjöld, Gunnar Jarring, Rolf Ekéus, Hans Blix, number issues, number Norwegian peacemakers, Danish peacekeepers, Icelandic experts, all over, Finnish peacekeepers, Martti Ahtisaari, I probably forget a lot, don't think that I'm imbalanced here. But yes, strong supporters of United Nations, both in peace and security, peacekeeping not least, and mediation and arbitration, which is very much our specialty. And then you have in development. The Nordic countries are among the per capita biggest contributors to the programs that are doing this, making this possible, that I was enumerating to you a while ago. And the Nordic countries are very strong on human rights and on rule of law. So when I speak about these three pillars, these are Nordic values, and it's a great identity of interest, I think, and values between the Nordic countries and the United Nations. So you should be proud. I could just take a little joke about mediation. I was once giving a speech here in New York after I had come back from Darfur, I think it was. I've done one of those, again, masochistic mediation exercises. Came back and I was invited to speak about mediation. It says in my CV, which you probably read out a while ago, that I'm an expert in conflict resolution and mediation. So I was invited to this NGO, but I didn't recognize the group in the room. It was different group, different crowd. What's the problem? Where am I? It was men with long beards and dreamy eyes. So I said, what is this? Then I looked at the invitation which was in front of me. It's a red big paper saying, come and meet Mr. Jan Eliasson. He's an expert on conflict resolution and meditation. Same speech. The last question is, by the risk of interfering in internal politics of the United States, I would say that, because that was a possibility at that moment when that horrible use of chemical weapons was taking place on the 21st of August, and when that possibility, that threat of use of force came out. And then, of course, you saw the British Parliament coming to the decision that they would not authorize that move, and that led President Obama to make a similar move here. And then, in the meantime, we could do the inspections by the Swedish, by the way. Åke Sällström did a great job. And then there was a discussion going on between Russia and the United States about what could prevent, what could be an alternative to making the military move, because if there had been a military move by the United States together with like-minded countries, it would not have had the support of the Security Council. So that would be leading to an action outside the United Nations that lead to a rather serious situation for the United Nations. And then came this other possibility that through the agreement of Russia and United States, one could achieve unity in the Security Council. By that, the veto power was discarded, so it was not relevant. And by that, the decision was taken to start a destruction of chemical weapons. And if you, by middle of next year, have achieved the destruction of chemical weapons, which is a horrible weapon, I've seen the use of it in the Iran-Iraq war, then it's a great feat. And then it's up to the political life in the United States to draw their own conclusions from that. But I, as a diplomat, of course, always prefer political solutions. And I hope we can find a political solution to ending this conflict about water. Okay, are we coming to the end? Thank you very much.